just say a couple of words. We're celebrating Gay Pride Month. The first Gay Pride Parade was held in 1970 in response to the Stonewall riots. It was held in New York City, in Lower Manhattan, and went up 6th Avenue, all the way up to Central Park. And in Central Park, they gathered. The organizers really didn't expect a big showing for this first gay pride ever in 1970, but over 5,000 people turned out for the first gay pride. They'll be celebrating gay pride again. The parade, another parade will be held in New York City. This year, they're expecting over 3 million. So, it's with pride that we have this service today in support of those that we love, those that we embrace, that are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, questioning people. And it makes me proud to be a part of such a service. Dr. Joseph Gary and Judith Longfield will take over the service from here. Thank you so much for doing this on behalf of LGBTQ.
And I want to thank Mary for encouraging me, because I have to begin with a confession. My grandmother told us when we were growing up, never talk politics, religion, or sex. So I'm going to apologize to grandmother now for what she would consider definitely an X-rated presentation. I promise you, even a year ago, I could not envision myself doing this. So, warning, you have been warned, okay? I am a former teacher. John, are you? Oh, great. And of course, a good teacher always begins with pre-assessment. Finding out what your students know before you teach them. And you have inside your order of service the little true and false things, okay? And they have been folded for you. And obviously, true, false, okay? And being a Unitarian, we have to give you other alternatives. So if you just don't know or don't want to guess, you fold it and show me the white side. And the way you do this, you know, if you ask for a show of hands, what happens? Everybody looks to see what everybody else is answering. So I have designed these so that they'll sit in the palm of your hand, and the only person who can see your responses are me. Okay? So, let me see. So, got it now? Okay. So, here's our first question. Oops. There is a definition of normal sex. Okay, are we getting a good look at this? Okay. The next question.
Can I stand up in front since I'm president?
My sexual fantasies reflect my sexual orientation. Okay. If you want to of someone who identifies as transgender, you should ask about their hormone treatment or surgical status. I should have used your question.
You should.
Same-sex couples have male and female roles. Gay guys only have anal sex. I told you it was going to be X-rated.
Roxanne laughed, so I looked at her.
Some of you realize that all of the statements were false. Some of you got many of them right and others of them incorrect. And some of you just weren't certain. You just didn't know. They're all misconceptions about the LGBTQ community. So, since I've made you show what you know and don't know, I think it's only fair that I should tell you what I did know and when did I know it. Okay? Before I knew the word gay or the concept gay, I realized my brother was different. But remember, grandmother says don't talk about sex. So imagine, I'm now 49 years of age and I'm going to graduate school. And I'm going to be sharing a home with 3 other women and my mother's best friend. And we have a discussion at the table whether it's okay for me to come and bring my 10-year-old daughter. We have a family meeting. And one of the women says, I want you to know I'm bisexual, but I'm okay. I've been taking my hormones. Okay, so I have no idea what bisexual means. I go home and I look it up in the dictionary, and I see that it means you like both sexes. Okay, so, all right, I move in with my 10-year-old daughter, and Rhonda and I have rooms directly across from each other. And after we've known each other for about 3 months, I finally feel bold enough to ask her about sex. And I said, Rhonda, I don't know anything about bisexuals. Would you be comfortable talking about yourself? To which she replied, yes. I'm a male waiting to be transformed into a female, and I'm lesbian. Apparently you're not getting that part. Yes. Well, I had my difficulties wrapping my head around it. I didn't care. I just didn't quite understand it. And I have now learned to call Rhonda transgender. But I'm not even sure in those days they had that word yet. So it has come a very, very long way. And my brother,
There's an issue with the power. Is it plugged in, Howard?
so my brother is the expert here. And he's going to tell you his story. And one thing I know from talking to my brother over the years is being LGBTQ is not for sissies.
Good morning. How do you follow that?
You have to be related.
Apparently.
As you always have.
I just want to explain to everybody today that I'm coming out again. I've never worn pink before, and I finally got comfortable enough to wear pink. The other thing is I have never, ever talked publicly about my personal, private life. I've given a lot of professional presentations, but never about who I am personally. One of the things that my sister shared with me yesterday was we were eating at lunch, and she said, "You've always been a very private person." And I said, "You know, I really have been." And I really thought about that, and I thought, well, what the hell am I doing here in Longfield, Georgia? My sister has asked me to do very few things through the years, and I thought, what have I got to lose? I'm retired. I don't have to protect my career anymore. They can't hurt me financially anymore. And, you know, as a gay person, those thoughts go through your mind. So I was finally comfortable enough to be who I am. I'm 70 years old, so I grew up in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. And the world that I grew up in, when I first identified that I was different, I went to the library in the high school, and there was not any literature about being homosexual. It did not exist. And I didn't even know what it was. And so I went to the University of Wisconsin in Stevens Point and went to the library there, and I think there was one book. And the book that I read told me how sick I was, and how perverted I was, and how miserable my life was going to be. And when you're 17 or 18 years of age, you don't know what that means. What is sick? You know, I didn't have a stomach ache. I didn't have a toothache. I thought, what is this? So I sort of struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled. My sister will attest that I dated in high school. I dated in college, women. I really tried to be the script, and it just didn't work for me. And the world that I grew up in, gay people were there was a lot of prejudice. Going to a gay bar put you in jeopardy. You could go to jail. In the South, you could be put in prison for being sexual with your partner. So that was a scary time. You couldn't join the military. My brother tried to get a security clearance, and because he had a gay brother, he was denied his military clearance. So my brother and I have had issues for years about the fact that he could not get a government clearance. So he was guilty by association. When I moved to Denver, I moved there with my partner, and we could not rent an apartment, a one-bedroom apartment, because we were the same sex. If I had been a male, or if we had been a different couple, we could have had a one-bedroom apartment. But because we were two men, we were forced to get a two-bedroom apartment. And it went across the board in everything. My second job, I was working in a children's facility, and my boss called me in, and the kids were discussing whether or not I was gay or not. And my boss called me in and said, "Are you gay?" And I said, "What does that have to do with anything? Why? Why are you asking me this question?" And he said, "Because we don't want people like you working here." Okay? Fit that on at 22, So I was told from a very early perspective that I was not worth anything, that I was different, that I was sick, that I was deprived. And so what I did is I took that information and I thought to myself, okay, this is who I am. What does my life mean going forward? And so, most gay people have to break the script, because we're taught by society that we're to get married, we're to have children, we're to do A, B, C, and D. And because we don't do those things, we have to make the script for ourselves. So you go through a whole journey of, what does my life mean? Where do we go from here? How am I going to make a contribution? And back when I grew up, gay men could be florists. We could be hairdressers. We could be ballet dancers. And none of those things appealed to me. It's like, damn. So you really have to, you go through this whole process. when you get into a relationship with somebody, the fun part about being gay is there's not predetermined roles. And so you and your partner have to figure out the roles, you know, and it's a wide open game. It's you know, do you manage money better? Do you cook better? Do you mow the lawn better? Are you more mechanical than I am? So that's the fun part when you get into a relationship, is you don't have these predetermined roles. The hard part of being in a relationship is when you go to the Christmas party and people at work don't know you're gay, who do you bring? You know, so you're constantly fighting those battles. The other issue for me was always about educating people. You know, first I educated my family. Like I said, my sister was embracing, my mother was embracing. My brother had issues for probably 10, 15 years. You know, rightfully so. You know, if I had chosen to have a military career and I didn't get a security clearance, I'd be pissed too. So those are kind of the things that come up. The other issue for me was I decided at some point in my life to go to Los Angeles. And I went to Los Angeles, and that was during the AIDS epidemic. And I could sit here and tell you horror stories about the AIDS epidemic. As a professional, I worked in a facility, and we had a Cuban that had been deported from Cuba for being gay. And he was dying of AIDS, and he died, and he was born on Valentine's Day. His name was Valentino. And I was very committed to getting his ashes back to Cuba. And I called the State Department, and I was told that the state, we didn't have any legal, you know, ties with Cuba. And on and on and on and on and on. There were funeral homes that did not deal with AIDS patients. There were dentists that did not deal with AIDS patients. I mean, it was horrible. And because you were gay, you automatically had AIDS. You know, that was a correlation that people made. You couldn't get care in this country if you were gay. You know, hospitals, I worked in hospital settings, and people, that's when universal precautions came out. You know, now because of that AIDS epidemic, there are now universal precautions in hospitals. But it was a really hard time. I lived in West Hollywood, which is sort of the gay mecca of California, and it was like every other apartment was empty. I mean, it was devastating. It devastated the gay community. So, you know, I lived through that. Moved back to Denver, and have been in Denver ever since. And I have seen a growth in the acceptance of gay people in the world. Well, actually, the United States, because there's still people, you can still get killed in some countries for being gay. And we've gone from being afraid of losing our jobs to now we have federal protection. We have gone from dating to actually being able to marry, which is phenomenal in my opinion. We have a gay park in Denver called Cheeseman Park, and it used to just infuriate me because it was a place for people to get married. And I would go to the park and think, why can these people get married and I can't get married? This is ridiculous. Not that I want to get married, but but it was kind of an insult to the gay community that they're having all these weddings at the gay park. So, you know, we've come a very long way. I still think we have a long way to go. What I try to tell people is that there's this much of me that's gay, and there's this much of me as a person. You know, I don't want to identify myself as a gay person. You know, I want to identify myself as a human being that happens to be gay. But I love to walk on the beach. You know, I love to swim. I love to ski. I love to fish. I'm invested in life. And, you know, I don't want somebody to meet me and say, oh, there's that gay guy. You know, I want somebody to meet me and say, there's that guy that loves to fish that happens to be gay. Does that make sense to people? Yeah. I'm also a person that's struggling with not struggling, but I manage a coronary artery disease. I had my first major heart attack at 46, and I've got 12 heart stents in. So, the first thing I told my cardiologist is I am not a cardiac patient. I'm a human being dealing with a cardiac issue. Same thing across the board. I'm a human being that happens to be gay, but there's a whole lot more to me than being gay. So that's kind of my soapbox issue. I have worked with, I call myself the Mother Teresa. I've worked with chronically mentally ill folks. I've worked with homeless folks. My last 19 years, I ran a community integration program for the traumatic brain injured folks. And my sexuality has never been an issue. It's been an issue for some people around me, but not for me. So, are there any questions?
Before that, I wanted to tell a story on my brother.
Watch it, I have a lot of you.
But I don't care. My brother is the most loving person I know. His partner, David, they were together for years and years and years. And my brother believes that there are genetic gays and there are situational gays. And he would say to David, David, you're not gay. This is my brother's gay partner. David, you're not gay. David, you're not gay. And years went by, and one time, David came home and said, I'll be damned, I'm not gay. What a gift to give another person, to give someone you love themselves and be willing to give them up. Thank you, Joseph.
David and I are best friends.
Mother was in deep mourning because she said, I'm going to lose a son. But we haven't. David is still our brother. But now he's our straight brother.
That shows that the gay people
you
divorce.
brought him out?
Gay people divorce. Our divorces are much nicer. Do you have any questions? Yes. What? Okay.
Not a question so much as a statement. I think what you're saying about you being a person first applies to many things.
Oh,
People who are deaf are people who have a hearing deficiency, who have a hearing loss. People who have diabetes, like my son, is a person first who happens to have diabetes.
That's right.
Not a diabetic. I don't like that word.
I hate it.
He is a person first. So I totally agree, and I'm so proud of you being here.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Unfortunately, there's so much of the world that doesn't see it that way when it comes to gay, but that's the reality of it.
Thank you so much for being here. So, all through your talk, this thing came back to me of being, I don't know, maybe 12 in Nashville, Tennessee, maybe younger. And we didn't go to the Unitarian church, but my parents enrolled me in a sex education class at the Unitarian church. And it was so wonderful, and I think it really made my life so much easier in so many ways, because not only did they teach us about gay relationships and how that was just fine and just another way that people express love, they also taught us about oral sex, anal sex, all the different variations that sex could, encompass, and that masturbation was normal and not, a sign of insanity or perversion. So it kind of saved my life. Anyway, I'm grateful to you, and I'm grateful again to the Unitarian Universalists for.
I just want to share with everybody that in my home, I have a transgender who's dating a straight man, and I have a black friend. He's mixed, but he identifies as black. He's 27 years old, and he went to school on a basketball scholarship. athletic, the whole 9 yards, totally straight, and we all get along. There's 4 of us, and we're all so very different, and we've all learned so many things from each other. Shaquille, who is the 27-year-old basketball person, I swore to him that if he moved in with me, that it wasn't going to rub off. And I think it took him about 6 months to figure that out. He's learned all about flowers. He's learned how to cook. And he's learned how to pick up the underwear off his bedroom floor. So he's now house trained. It's really hard for him to bring girlfriends over because they say that they like me better than him. And they always say, "How's Joe? How's Joe?" And Shaquille had never had a father, and he told me before I came to this trip, as a matter of fact, he's texted me every day, he said, "If I could choose a dad, you would be the father that I would choose." The other thing that my sister did not share with you is I broke ground in Denver for adopting a 15-year-old boy, Hispanic Indian male, at the age of 15, and he's 46 now, so do the math. I was the first openly gay man in Denver, Colorado that got custody of a teenage boy, and that's because of what I did for a living. They knew me in the social service. One of my best friends ran the social service department in Denver, and I'd appeared in front of Judge Weeks numerous times on juvenile cases. And when the DA was being very ugly about the fact that I was gay, Judge Weeks said, this man will give this boy a home better than any facility I could ever put him in. So I was the first person in Denver that got custody of a teenage boy. A straight teenage boy. As a matter of fact, I was approached by the Department of Social Services to open up a home for runaway gay kids and didn't want to take on that liability. And that's one of the greatest regrets I've ever lived with.
Are there any other questions? Oh, good.
I was just curious to know when you were conscious of being gay, if you understood what that meant, or even the sense of being different, at what age? And then at what age did you identify as being gay, actually, and then additionally, when did you tell your family? What age then?
Well, I'm going to tell the family part. When he said to the family that he was gay, we went, "Yeah."
You knew. How old were you?
I was probably 18. Back in those days, we had a sexual awakening later in life than they do now. I was probably 20 before I really identified that I was gay. I didn't want to be.
Yeah, no, I understand,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I do not because of that, but because I understand why one would want to not be gay.
Yeah. And one of the things I told my mother, I said, I really want to please people. And I looked at her and I said, do you think I really woke up one day and said, I choose this, I want to be hated by half the world, yeah.
Anyone else? Because there'll be 2 more and that'll be it.
I'm unsettled hearing that there are people who are that you believe there are people who are situational gays and people who are genetically gay. Because I think of all these, in the past, efforts to re-educate and reprogram people who are gay, and wonder, well, isn't it an issue then, now that there are supposedly people who are situationally gay, because I just have never thought about that before. Isn't that an impetus for these re-educational or programming efforts to to have ground.
Most states have outlawed conversion therapy. I think when we're talking about situational gay, I think we're talking about prisons. Those kind of situations where it's a very different kind of work. The other sex is not available, if that makes any sense. As a matter of fact, I just had a conversation with a person that was just recently paroled. And one of the things that he shared with me was he was surprised when he was in prison about the people that were engaged in homosexual activity. He said people that you would never suspect. And I would assume that when those people get out of prison that they are no longer engaged in homosexual activity. We're sexual animals. And I think that that's what happens in those kind of settings. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. But they've done a lot of studies. They've cut gay men's brains up when they die, and there's a different brain chemistry in a gay man's brain. And that's the latest studies. Yeah.
And when I used that word, I had a woman friend who was sexually abused when she was younger. I don't think she's gay, but she's so turned off by men that she identifies as a lesbian. And yet, when we go places together, guess who's oogling all the men?
You.
And back to my best friend David. David had been abused by his older brother. So that was and I didn't know that going into the relationship. I didn't know that for about a year after I'd been there.
Okay.
My question to you, Joe, is you'd mentioned that you moved from place to place. What do you think the amount of your acceptance of yourself deals with what type of surrounding you're involved in? For instance, in Hollywood or Denver, the larger cities, there seems to be a little bit more community.
Oh, yeah.
And so how do you talk to people who live in Brunswick, Georgia, since you've been here for 2 days? And what type of thing would you say for people who may find themselves in an area where there's not as much support?
Those of you who know me know that we grew up gypsies.
I lived in Denver, and then I got a really good opportunity to go to California. I was there 3 years and hated it and came back. That's a tough question. When I told my mother I was gay, the first words of advice she said to me were, you need to move to a big city because people are more accepting. And boy, was that accurate information. I love small towns, but I don't like small town judgment, if that makes any sense. I would suggest any gay person in Brunswick, Georgia, to move and then come back. Get that support and then move back, if that makes any sense.
Younger.
Pardon?
Said more the younger gays.
Yeah.
You're talking speaking to people who are
Yeah.
discovering that they are.
Yeah. You learn so many things in that move. One of the things that I discovered when I moved to LA was Denver was a cow town when I lived there. And I always wanted to know if I could make it in a major city. And I did, and I was successful, and I loved it. The biggest shock to me when I went to LA was I went to the Gay Pride Parade in LA. Are you ready for this one? I could not identify with anybody in that parade. I thought, who are these people? I don't wear jock straps. I don't dress in leather. Who are these people? And at the end of the parade, they had friends of gays. I could relate to those people. They were normal. So I think what the media has done is really not shown 80% of us. I think that the media really gets off on all the craziness. So, yeah.
I was just going to say, Joe, be very careful because you've taken the first step. You have a pink shirt on today.
Oh well.
So next time it may be a tutu. No, I'm just kidding.
You think I'll become a cross-dresser at 70?
Nothing is impossible.